The first time Adrian Ravenscourt heard the name Winchester, he was a boy standing in the echoing shadows of a grand hall that no longer belonged to him. He remembered polished floors reflecting the pale light, portraits sheeted in white like shrouds, and a row of solemn men at a long table, passing judgment over his family as if they were nothing more than figures on a ledger. His father's shoulders had been straight but heavy, his mother's gloved hands tight around a useless lace handkerchief. On the opposite side of the room, elegant and smiling, there had been the Winchester patriarch, a man whose calm expression hid a predator's satisfaction. Contracts had been presented, ink glistening darkly, proofs of signatures, maps of boundaries, accounts of debts. Men in powdered wigs and crisp coats spoke of mismanagement, of falsified agreements, of improprieties that Adrian's father denied, with a voice that grew hoarse and desperate. At the end, it had not mattered. The decision was rendered, the properties lost, and humiliation fell over the Ravenscourts like a shroud. Adrian was young, but not so young that he failed to understand betrayal when he saw it. The Winchester gaze had settled on him once, measured, dismissive, assured, as if a boy's fury posed no threat at all. Over the years that followed, that look burned itself into Adrian's mind. The Ravenscourt name did not vanish, but it shrank, wounded and stripped of its power. The grand estate that had once been theirs passed into other hands, and every retelling of the scandal painted his father as careless or corrupt. The truth that the Winchester patriarch had forged and manipulated, distorted and deceived, went buried beneath the weight of official documents and the triumph of the victor. Adrian watched his parents age too quickly. He watched their invitations diminish, their former allies turn their attentions elsewhere, their titles become more ornament than influence. He listened at doors, piecing together fragments of conversations. The more he learned, the sharper his resolve grew. It was the Winchesters, not the girl, never the girl. He hardly knew she existed. The girl, he was told in passing, was shy and quiet, often ill. Their daughter kept mostly from view, raised in the fading splendor of a house that had once boasted more than it did now. Her name drifted through rumor only occasionally, like a faint note in a loud, discordant symphony, Elara Winchester. To Adrian she was insignificant, a shadow attached to a hateful name. The architect of his family's ruin was not a delicate daughter, but her father, who had wielded law and deception with equal skill. When that man died, suddenly, and some whispered suspiciously, it did nothing to soothe Adrian's resentment. The destruction was already done. Years deepened the grooves of that resentment, rather than softening them. Adrian grew into his title with a restrained, quiet intensity that unsettled those who had once mocked his diminished status. He rebuilt what he could, investments carefully chosen, alliances formed with methodical patience. He did not seek the glittering center of society's attention. He preferred the edges where people said more than they meant to, and revealed more than they wished. In those edges, he began to hear a different name paired with Winchester. Elara. Lady Elara Winchester, alone now, her father gone, her house a crumbling echo of its former glory. She was, by all accounts, the last fragile remnant of a shattered legacy. The very man who had brought ruin to the Ravenscourts left behind a daughter marked by whispers and pity. Suitors ignored her, neighbors avoided her, and relatives circled like vultures over what remained of her inheritance. Adrian listened. Relatives, it seemed, planned to contest her claim to what little remained of Winchester lands, arguing that a woman so tarnished, so unprotected, could hardly be entrusted with anything of value. There were legal maneuvers, quiet approaches to solicitors, subtle rumors seeded to suggest Elara was unstable or incapable. Adrian watched as if studying a chessboard. He knew the law as well as any solicitor by then. He knew that a single binding alliance, a marriage, could transform the fragile shell of Elara's position into a fortress. With a husband of sufficient rank and influence, her relatives could be held at bay, their schemes cut off at the knees. And if that husband were Adrian Ravenscourt, Duke of a house once betrayed, then something more than protection could be achieved. If he married Elara Winchester, the very family that had devoured the Ravenscourts would become dependent upon him for its survival. Through the bonds of marriage, property could be restructured, land reclaimed under new titles, and the last pieces of Winchester power drawn quietly into his hands. A marriage of appearance cloaked in civility might become the sharpest form of vengeance. He considered it dispassionately at first, as one might weigh investments or options before a court. But the more he examined the possibility, the more a grim satisfaction took root. No public quarrel, no scandalous duel, no reckless confrontation would be needed. Only a vow spoken at an altar, a ring placed on a trembling hand, and documents signed in elegantly inked strokes. The Winchesters had destroyed his family with ink and paper. He would end theirs the same way. He could almost hear the old man's voice in his mind, protesting from beyond the grave, seeing his daughter's future used as trade for the very house he had tried to crush. The thought should have disturbed him, perhaps. It did not. It steadied him. All that remained was to meet Lady Alara Winchester. He did not hurry. Vengeance deserved patience. He watched from afar first, drawing upon contacts who still dealt with what was left of the Winchester holdings. Land stewards spoke of a mistress who paid them late but apologized, who sold ornaments to keep laborers fed. A dressmaker mentioned quietly that her orders had grown simpler, plainer, as if the lady of the house had begun abandoning any pretense of vanity. Servants, once proud, now worked harder to maintain a home that had lost its luster. Carriages grew older, curtains more frayed. The house was not on the verge of destitution, but its decline was steady, undeniable. And at the center of it all there was Alara, a woman alone, with a name stained by her father's actions. The prospect should have pleased Adrian unreservedly. Instead, it left a curious, unwelcome seed of unease in his chest. The Winchester patriarch he could hate with full conviction. He could imagine the man at every turn, smug and calculating. But a daughter who sold her jewels to pay wages or apologized for late payments. That did not fit the picture he had drawn of Winchester cruelty. He told himself it did not matter. He arranged his approach with care, as he did everything. No sudden appearance, no overt gesture that might startle or send gossip racing through the drawing rooms. He requested a meeting under the pretext of discussing a minor property dispute, the sort of entangled boundary matter that had plagued both their families for years. The message he sent was composed with precise politeness. He noted that, as neighboring landholders of a sort, they had mutual interests that might be better settled in private conversation than in public court. There was nothing in his words that hinted at emotion, nothing that suggested the history between their houses. Yet when the acceptance came, penned in a slender, elegant hand that trembled just enough to be noticeable, Adrian felt a tension in his muscles he had not expected. Lady Alara Winchester would receive him. The day he travelled to the Winchester estate, the sky hung low and pale, as if uncertain whether to offer sunlight or rain. His carriage rolled steadily along the road that once had been familiar to his family's horses. The closer he drew, the more memory rose around him. A certain row of trees where he had ridden as a boy, a stone wall against which he had once leaned, watching his father speak with tenants. He did not let the recollections slow him. They were ghosts. He was no longer the boy in 2 large boots and second-hand pride. He was a duke with his own household, servants, and influence. The name Ravenscourt might no longer rest upon sprawling lands, but it retained a lineage that no court could strip away. As the Winchester estate came into view, he studied it with cold assessment. The house was still impressive, its facade broad and symmetrical, its stones pale and dignified. Yet there were lines of neglect, gardens too wild in their borders, a section of roof that might soon call for repair, windows less gleaming than they should have been. Not ruin, but decline. The edges frayed. Adrian stepped down from his carriage with deliberate calm. A footman in livery that had seen better days approached, bowing with respectful haste. Adrian handed over his hat and gloves without comment, his gaze sweeping the entrance hall as he was ushered inside. It too bore the marks of quiet struggle. Tapestries still hung, but some had faded. The floors shone, but in places the polish barely masked wear. Portraits watched from the walls, Winchester faces rendered in oil, their painted eyes as proud and complacent as ever. He felt an old heat behind his ribs, and banked it. They led him to a drawing room, where a faint fire flickered, battling a chill that seemed to seep from stone and memory alike. The room had been arranged carefully, as if someone had worked hard to create an impression of comfort and solidity. Fresh flowers, though fewer than might be expected, graced a table. A tea service stood ready, its porcelain delicate and well kept. and there, standing near the window, was Ilara Winchester. She turned as he entered, and in that single moment, Adrian's plan, so carefully forged, felt the first faint crack. She was not what he expected. He had anticipated poise, the brittle, sharp-edged composure of a woman raised in a house that had once ruled its circle. He had imagined hauteur or arrogance, or at least the veneer of a woman accustomed to power even in its decline. Instead, he saw someone who seemed carved from quiet resilience. Ilara's gown was modest but well-mended, the sort of thing a lady might wear when she could no longer afford new fashions, but refused to surrender dignity. Her figure was slender, almost too slight, and the pallor of her skin spoke of long nights and little rest. Yet it was her eyes that arrested him. They were large, a deep, unsettling shade that carried shadows in their depths. There was tiredness there, yes, and something like sorrow, but also an unwavering steadiness, as if she had long ago ceased expecting kindness from the world and had decided to walk through it regardless. She curtsied when he bowed, her movements graceful though faintly unsteady. "Your Grace," she said softly. Her voice was gentle, with a husk of exhaustion around the edges. There was no resentment in it, no sharpness, only a careful politeness that made his own name sound strangely heavy. "Lady Ilara," he replied. He watched her closely as he straightened, searching for traces of the man he loathed. Did her mouth tilt like his? Did she hold herself with the same arrogant ease? Did her eyes flash with the same cold cunning? He found none of it. She motioned toward the chairs arranged near the fire. "Thank you for calling. I understand you wish to discuss a boundary matter?" Her hands brushed against the back of a chair as she moved, steadying herself with a barely noticeable touch. "Yes," Adrian said slowly, lowering himself into the seat she indicated. "A matter of some interest to both our estates. I felt it best handled privately." She poured tea with practiced motions, though the faintest tremor in her fingers caused the china to clink softly against its saucer. He saw the moment she silently chastised herself, her jaw tightening for an instant, before she forced it to relax. When she passed him the cup, he noted the thinness of her wrist, the slight blue trace of veins beneath her skin. A woman, yes, but also, somehow, a person worn down to the delicate bones of endurance. If her father had been a viper, Ilara Winchester was something very different. Yet she carried his name. They spoke first of the boundary, of an old stone wall that had long divided a field claimed by two estates. Adrian had chosen that particular matter precisely because it was small, easily resolvable, and allowed him to observe her reaction to negotiation. She did not argue. She did not scheme. Instead, she examined the details he laid before her, studying the papers with meticulous care. When she looked up, there was a faint line between her brows, as if concentration cost her effort. "It seems to me," she said, "that the land is more rightly part of your holding. I have no desire to contest something that was never truly Winchester to begin with." He had expected her to cling to any piece of land left to her, however insignificant. The simplicity of her answer unsettled him. "Are you quite certain?" he asked, more to probe than from need of confirmation. Her lips curved, not in amusement but in something resigned. "My father's appetite for acquisition exceeded his integrity," she said quietly. "I have learned to question everything he claimed. If by relinquishing a disputed strip of field I can make at least one matter right, I count it no great loss." The admission struck him harder than he cared to admit. He had not expected her to speak of her father in such terms, and certainly not to a man whose name had once been intertwined with scandal at the Winchesters' expense. There was no defensiveness in her tone, no attempt to soften the truth, only a weary honesty. "You speak of him with surprising frankness," Adrian observed. Something flickered in her eyes. "The world has already judged him," she replied, "and judged me by extension. I find little use in pretending." She hesitated, her gaze restless for a moment, before returning to his. "You must be aware of the rumors, Your Grace. They cling to this house like dust." He was aware. He had fed some of them himself, in the privacy of his thoughts, if not in society's ears. "Yes," he said, "I am aware." "Then you know," she continued, "that I am alone here. The reputation he left has driven many away. Those who have not left, most of them stay for what they can still take." The last words were delivered with a softness that made them more piercing. She lifted her cup, but her hand faltered. The china tilted, tea sloshing perilously close to the rim. Before he could think, Adrian reached out, steadying the cup with his own hand, wrapping his fingers around hers. Her skin was cool. Too cool. He felt the slight jolt of her surprise, saw her startled gaze snap to his. For a breath, the air between them stilled, holding the weight of unasked questions. Then she withdrew, gently but firmly, reclaiming her hand and her composure. "Forgive me," she murmured. "I have not been resting as I should. Are you unwell?" The question left his mouth more sharply than he intended. Her smile was quick and fragile. "I am overburdened, perhaps, but the household must run. The accounts must be managed. The staff must be paid. Illness is a luxury I cannot afford." The words landed like a stone in his chest. He had come prepared to manipulate a spoiled heiress, a woman insulated by privilege and complicit in her father's greed. Instead, he found someone who stood alone before a crumbling legacy, holding it together with threadbare strength. The dissonance rattled him. "Your relatives," he said carefully, "do they offer no assistance?" Her gaze drifted to the window, where the light had begun to thin. "They write letters," she said. "They advise. They recommend that I relinquish more and more into their keeping. It is remarkable how eager people become to assist when there is talk of property to be divided. Have they threatened legal action?" The question was blunt, but she did not flinch. "Not yet," she answered, "but they are speaking with solicitors. They hint that I am not fit to manage what remains. It would be easier, you see, if I were to declare myself incapable, or if some incident could be misinterpreted." He understood then. They wanted scandal. They wanted a fall. "If they attempted such a thing," he said, his voice unexpectedly low, "what would you do?" She blinked, surprised perhaps that he seemed to care about the answer. "I do not know," she confessed. "I have so little support. I am no one's priority. I suspect that if I protested, it would only confirm their view that I am unstable." Her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I am tired of fighting shadows, Your Grace. But I am more tired of watching my home, however flawed its history, be carved apart by those who never cared for it until they scented opportunity." A silence settled over the room. The fire crackled softly, and somewhere in the house a clock chimed a mellow note. Adrian studied her. He had expected anger to rise, anger that she, the daughter of the man who had ruined his family, should now face ruin herself. Some cold, vindictive part of him had anticipated satisfaction at seeing the Winchester line reduced to this vulnerable, beleaguered woman. Instead, what unfurled in his chest was something far more dangerous. Pity. Then, more insidiously, respect. He saw no trace of her father's cruelty in her. No entitlement, no manipulative charm. Only a woman who had spent years paying for sins that were not her own, shoulders bowed beneath burdens she had never chosen. This complicates matters, he told himself sternly, but vengeance did not require hatred, not in its execution. It required only resolve and opportunity. The plan remained sound. Marrying Alara Winchester would protect her from grasping relatives while simultaneously placing her lands and name under his control. Whatever softness he felt could be set aside. He had learned long ago to separate feeling from necessity. He drew a breath, steadying his thoughts. "Lady Alara," he said, "there is a way to shield yourself from such designs." She turned to him, a faint crease returning between her brows. "If I could retain a competent solicitor—" "More than that," he interrupted gently but firmly. "A solicitor can be challenged, a steward can be dismissed, but a husband of adequate rank and influence cannot be so easily brushed aside." Colour drained from her face, then slowly returned in a soft flush. "You suggest marriage," she whispered. "I suggest alliance," he corrected, though he knew well what form such an alliance would take. You stand alone. That makes you, in the eyes of those who would take what you have, vulnerable. With the protection of a husband, particularly one whose title commands a measure of respect, the ground beneath their schemes would shift. She looked down at her hands, where her fingers now twisted together. "You speak as if such a husband is easily obtained." "You are of noble birth," he said. "Your lineage, whatever its stains, still carries weight. There are men who would overlook rumor for the sake of what remains of your estates." Her eyes closed briefly. "Men who would take what they can, and leave me with even less." She opened them again, meeting his gaze with quiet resolve. "You must forgive my lack of enthusiasm, Your Grace. I have seen how some marriages are bargained. I have no wish to surrender what little autonomy I still possess to another person's ambition." Her words struck dangerously close to his own intentions. "If you chose wisely," he said, keeping his tone even, "your husband's ambition could align with your protection, not your defeat." "And where," she asked softly, "would I find such a paragon?" Adrian held her gaze, making a decision that felt like stepping into a storm. "In me," he said. The world seemed to still. Ilara stared at him, the meaning of his words settling upon her slowly, like snowfall gathering weight with each flake. Her lips parted, then closed again as if she could not quite trust her voice. "You are proposing marriage," she said at last, as though testing the word for sharp edges. "I am proposing a solution," he replied. "One that benefits us both. Your position becomes safeguarded. Your relative's schemes become far more difficult to pursue, and I—" He paused. What could he say? That he would gain through her a measure of power and land his family had lost? That part of him wanted not only protection for her, but retribution still. That his heart and his history were at war, and he refused to acknowledge which side might win. "I gain," he finished, "a practical alliance with a house once opposed to mine. The gesture would not go unnoticed. It would demonstrate that old scandals can be settled, that former enemies may become partners rather than adversaries." It was not untrue, but it was not the entire truth. She did not respond immediately. Instead, she rose slowly to her feet, as if the act cost her effort. Her hand brushed the chair again in that unconsciously seeking motion. He stood as well, more out of instinct than courtesy. "Why?" she asked. The question was almost bare of inflection, but there was something raw beneath it. He could not answer her as he might answer another man in a private room, with all the brutal candor of his nature. He could not tell her, "Because your father stole from mine, and marrying you lets me place my family's ghostly wounds under my own steadier hand. Because seeing Winchester lands signed over to Ravenscourt by your consent might finally silence the echo of courtroom judgment in my memory." Instead, he chose a safer path. "Because you deserve not to fight alone," he said. The words surprised even him. She laughed then, softly, briefly, a sound more of disbelief than amusement. "You have known me for the span of a single conversation," she said, "and you think you know what I deserve." "I know what injustice looks like," he said. "I have seen it before." Her gaze sharpened at that, as if sensing there was more beneath his statement than he had revealed. For a moment he thought she might ask. Instead, she swayed where she stood. It was slight at first, a delicate tipping of balance, like a reed in a faint wind. Then her color drained again, leaving her almost translucent. Her hand went out, searching for purchase, but the chair was half a step too far. Her breathing hitched. "Lady Ilara?" he said sharply. Her lips moved. The room blurred for her. He saw it in the way her focus slipped, her eyes no longer quite fixed on his. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I have not been sleeping." The last word dissolved as her knees gave way. Adrian moved before thought could form. He closed the distance between them in a heartbeat, catching her as she collapsed. Her weight was nothing in his arms, light as if the burdens she carried had hollowed her out from within. Her head fell against his shoulder, a strand of hair brushing his cheek. "Ilara," he said again, more urgently. Her eyes were closed now, lashes resting like shadows against pale skin. He felt the slow rise and fall of her chest, a breath, then another, too shallow for his liking. For one terrible instant, a memory seized him. His mother, fainting under the weight of public disgrace, his father's helpless hands reaching, the sound of gasps from the watching crowd. This was different, he told himself, but the panic coiling in his gut did not care. "Someone," he called, raising his voice. Footsteps arrived with a clatter as a maid burst into the room, eyes wide at the sight before her. "My lady," she cried. "She fainted," Adrian said, forcing his tone into command. "Bring smelling salts and water, quickly." The maid bobbed a frantic curtsy and fled. Alone with Ilara once more, Adrian lowered her carefully onto a nearby chaise, arranging her with a care that felt almost intimate. He loosened the high collar of her gown just enough to ease her breathing, acutely aware of the softness of the skin at her throat. His fingertips brushed a pulse there, faint but steady. Too pale, he thought. Too thin. Too alone. The realization cut through him like a blade. He had come into this house with a plan wrapped in cold logic, convinced that he could enact it without entangling his emotions. But as he looked down at Ilara Winchester, unconscious and vulnerable, something within him shifted irrevocably. "This is the daughter of the man you hate," a harsher part of his mind insisted. "She bears the name that poisoned your family's honor." Another voice, quieter yet more insistent, answered, "She is not him." He thought of her words, the quiet condemnation of her father's greed, the weary acknowledgement of the rumors that clung to her, the simple, exhausted confession that she had no one who truly stood beside her. He thought of the way her hands shook when she poured tea, how quickly she had moved to grant him what was rightfully his in the boundary dispute, as if making one small corner of the world honest again would absolve her of inherited guilt. He had not expected to feel protective, but he did. The maid returned, flanked by an older woman who must have been the housekeeper. Between them they brought the requested salts and a glass of water. Adrian stepped back only slightly, unwilling to move far from Ilara's side. The housekeeper applied the salts with practiced efficiency, and within moments Ilara stirred. Her lashes fluttered, her hand twitched. "Easy, my lady," the housekeeper said gently. "You've given us quite a fright." Ilara's eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding their depths. For a moment she did not seem to recognize her surroundings. Then her gaze found Adrian, standing like a dark pillar at her side, and a flood of mortification washed over her features. "Your Grace," she breathed. I am so sorry." "There is nothing to apologize for," he said, more sharply than he intended. He tempered his tone. "You need rest." "I need to stand," she said, attempting to push herself upright. Her arms trembled. "I cannot—" "You will do no such thing," he interrupted, his hand hovering near her shoulder in case she fell again. "You will remain seated until you are fully recovered. That is not a request. It is a necessity." Her eyes flickered with a spark of stubbornness that, under other circumstances, might have amused him. "You have no authority to command me so," she said faintly. "Not yet," he answered, before he could stop himself. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Her lips parted, but whatever retort she had been forming was lost as the effort exhausted her. She slumped back against the cushions, closing her eyes briefly. "Please," she whispered, "this is humiliating enough. Do not make more of it than it is." He saw the plea there, not merely to preserve her dignity before him, but to prevent the household from gossiping more than they already did. She was too used to being watched, judged, measured by standards she had never chosen. "Very well," he said quietly. "Then we shall say nothing of it beyond this room." The housekeeper nodded gratefully. "You are kind, Your Grace." Kind. The word sat oddly with him. He had not come here to be kind, yet as he watched Ilara fight to reclaim her composure, as he saw the thin threads of pride and determination holding her together, he realized his intentions had already begun to alter, whether he admitted it or not. He still wanted justice for his family. He still burned with the old anger, but he could no longer imagine achieving satisfaction in a way that would deepen the suffering of the woman before him. If he took her lands, her legacy, her last fragile hold on security, what would he become? Her father. The thought repulsed him. No, he thought, feeling the ground shift beneath his carefully laid plans. Whatever alliance he forged with Ilara Winchester would need to protect as much as it reclaimed. He could not allow her to become collateral in a war she had never chosen. "Lady Ilara," he said as her breathing steadied, "my offer stands, not from pity, but from conviction." She turned her head slightly toward him, eyes half-lidded, yet focused. "Your conviction," she said softly, "or your strategy?" "Both," he admitted. "I would not insult you with claims of pure selflessness, but neither will I deny that, having met you, my regard for this arrangement is no longer merely practical." The faintest blush rose to her cheeks, delicate as dawn light. "You hardly know me," she repeated, though her voice lacked the earlier edge of disbelief. "You know only that I am tired and alone, and foolish enough to swoon in front of a duke." His mouth twitched, a ghost of a smile threatening. "I know that you are honest enough to condemn your father's wrongs, loyal enough to sell your own comfort for the sake of your servants, and proud enough to despise the thought of being someone's burden." Her eyes widened, as if she had not thought anyone had noticed those things. "I also know," he continued quietly, "what it is to be judged by the actions of another. I know what it is to have your house's name whispered, as if it carries contagion. On that score at least, I believe we understand one another better than you think." She held his gaze for a long moment. Outside, the light faded a little more, and the shadows in the room lengthened. Somewhere distant, a door closed with a hollow sound. Within the small circle by the fire, a different kind of closing and opening was taking place. "If I were to agree," she said at last, "what sort of marriage would this be?" For the first time since stepping into the Winchester house, Adrian felt his answer come not from calculation, but from a place he did not yet dare to name. "One in which," he said slowly, "your enemies would learn that you are not unprotected. One in which your voice would not be silenced, and one in which I, perhaps, might finally begin to lay certain ghosts to rest." Her brows drew together, as if she sensed layers beneath his words that she could not yet untangle. She did not press. She was too tired for that. But he could see, in the way her fingers stilled and her shoulders relaxed a fraction, that the idea of no longer standing alone tempted her more than she wished to admit. "I would need time," she said softly. "This is not a decision I can make in an afternoon, after fainting like a character in some overwrought story." "You will have it," he said. He did not tell her that each moment she thought and hesitated. The old part of him that loved the idea of retribution fought with the newer part that wanted, against all sense, to shield her from every blow. He did not tell her that already his heart was slipping dangerous inches away from vengeance and toward something far more treacherous. He would discover that slowly, in the days and nights to come when she accepted his proposal, not only out of necessity, but with a fragile, growing trust. When he watched her navigate society's cruelty and his relatives' schemes, he would find himself stepping between her and every harm, as if he had been born for that role. For now it was enough that he had seen her as she truly was, kind, wounded, her soul bearing the imprint of years of quiet suffering. It was enough that, holding her in his arms as she fainted, he had felt something inside him fracture, not his resolve to confront the past, but the narrow, merciless shape that resolve had once taken. He left the Winchester house that evening with his plan altered, though he would not yet admit how much. He still intended to marry her. But for the first time, he was no longer certain it would be only for vengeance. The following days unfolded with a strange, deliberate slowness, as if time itself sensed that something delicate and irrevocable was being decided. Adrian did not return to the Winchester estate at once. He allowed several days to pass, sending only a brief note through his secretary, inquiring after Lady Alara's health. The message was formal, but the ink had barely dried before he realized how intently he waited for a reply. It came the next afternoon. Her hand was steadier this time, the script more assured, but he could almost read between the lines. She had recovered, but only in the way a soldier rises from a battlefield, knowing more storms are coming. "Your Grace, I thank you for your concern. The faintness you witnessed was an unfortunate consequence of my own neglect, not of any grave illness. I regret any distress it may have caused. Be assured that I have attended to my rest, and am again capable of receiving visitors. Regarding your proposal, I remain in earnest reflection. I do not take lightly the weight of what you offered. When I have settled my thoughts with more clarity than at present, I shall convey my answer. With respect, Elara Winchester." It was the kind of letter any lady of rank might send, yet something in its simplicity cut straight through his armor. She did not preen, did not flatter, did not feign indifference. She simply acknowledged what had passed between them, and admitted with admirable honesty that she was not yet ready to decide. Adrian refolded the letter and placed it in a drawer he usually reserved for documents of consequence. Contracts, deeds, treaties of a sort. It belonged there. Whatever answer she eventually gave would alter the course of both their lives. His household took note of his quiet distraction. At breakfast, his cousin Marcus raised a brow over the rim of his coffee cup. Marcus was younger by a handful of years, broad of shoulder and easy of smile. the sort of man who had always drifted effortlessly through drawing rooms while Adrian preferred the periphery. "You are uncommonly silent this morning," Marcus remarked, "more so than usual, which is saying something. Is there a new bill in Parliament that offends your sensibilities, or have you discovered we are all secretly living in debt?" "We are not in debt," Adrian said shortly. Marcus grinned. "Then it must be a woman." Adrian's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on his newspaper. "Do not be absurd." "The last time you looked that thoughtful," Marcus continued unconcerned, "you were deciding whether to invest in those mills everyone warned you about. As I recall, you made a fortune while your more cautious associates blinked." "And your point?" "Men do not stare through their coffee like that over profits," Marcus said lightly. "They stare like that when they are about to do something uncharacteristically reckless. Since I have not heard of you challenging anyone to a duel, my money is on a lady." Adrian lowered the paper slowly. "You are insufferable." "Frequently," Marcus agreed. "Who is she?" Adrian could have deflected. For most of his adult life he had guarded his inner world with a severity bordering on asceticism. Yet now, perhaps because the matter had already begun to escape his control, he found himself answering. "Lady Elara Winchester," he said. The name fell between them like a gauntlet. Marcus, to his credit, did not immediately scoff. He tilted his head, studying Adrian as if he were a particularly challenging opponent across a fencing strip. "The Winchester heiress," he murmured. "Such as she is. I had heard whispers that her circumstances were reduced." "That is an understatement," Adrian said. "And you mean to court her?" Marcus's brows lifted. "Forgive me, but is that not somewhat perverse given the history between your houses?" "That same history," Adrian replied, "makes this alliance strategically potent." The words tasted colder than he felt. "Strategically potent," Marcus repeated. "You sound like an admiral discussing ships, not a man considering marriage." Adrian set the paper aside. "Our family was humiliated in a very public fashion, Marcus. Lands lost, reputation dragged into question. We did not deserve it." "I know," Marcus said more gently now. "We all know." "Then you understand why the prospect of binding Winchester to Ravenscourt holds appeal. It would signal to the world that the scandal that destroyed us no longer defines us, that in some measure the debt is balanced." Marcus leaned back, fingers drumming lightly on the table. "And Lady Elara? What does she gain from such balancing of accounts?" "Protection," Adrian said at once. "Her relatives circle her like scavengers. They question her competence, whisper about her health, and seek excuses to seize what remains of her inheritance. With me at her side, their efforts would meet a far less compliant opponent." Marcus's gaze sharpened. "Protecting a Winchester, cousin? That is a curious development." Adrian's jaw tightened. "She is not her father. So you have met her?" "Yes." "And?" Adrian hesitated, realizing that anything he said now would reveal more than he usually allowed. He saw again the tremor in her hands, the pallor of her face as she tried to stand, the quiet steel in her voice when she spoke of her father's corruption. "She is—" He searched for a word and found none adequate. "Different." Marcus's expression shifted, just enough to suggest genuine interest beneath the teasing. "Different in what way?" "She sees clearly what her father was," Adrian said slowly, "and yet she bears the cost as though it were her own sin. She holds that house together with nothing but thread and sheer will, and people call her unfit for the very burden she has carried alone for years." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You like her?" Adrian looked away. "That is irrelevant." "It rarely is," Marcus said dryly. "Forgive me if this seems impertinent, but I must ask, when you first conceived this plan, marrying into the Winchester line, did you intend to harm her?" The word hung heavy. Adrian could not retreat into easy denial. The truth had no shape until he forced himself to name it. "I intended," he said at last, "to reclaim what was taken from us. If, in doing so, she lost what her father stole, I considered that acceptable." "And now?" Marcus prompted quietly. Now Adrian thought he had carried her fainting form in his arms, and felt his carefully tended wrath recoil at the idea of adding one more wound to her collection. "Now," he said, "I find that less acceptable." Marcus studied him for another long moment. "Then perhaps," he said, "you should decide which matters more to you, the past that cannot be undone, or the woman who stands in front of you now?" Adrian did not answer. He did not yet know. Ilara Winchester did not sleep well the nights following Adrian's visit. She lay awake in a bed that had once been draped in the finest linens, listening to the house breathe around her. The old timbers creaked, pipes groaned faintly, the wind pressed gentle fingers against the glass panes. Somewhere down the corridor a maid coughed in her sleep. In the servants' quarters beyond, there was the occasional murmur of voices, the rustle of exhausted bodies turning on narrow mattresses. This house consumes everyone who loves it, she thought. Her father had loved it in his way, loved its grandeur, its influence, its power to impress and intimidate. He had carved away at other people's security to swell its shadow, leaving ruin in his wake. She had looked up to him once, a little girl dazzled by the shine of his confidence. Now she walked through rooms that whispered of his sins. The walls remembered, the halls remembered, visitors remembered, and the world expected her to pay. Adrian Ravenscourt's proposal haunted her. A duchess, a shield, a husband whose name might silence, if not erase, the worst of the rumors that clung to her like smoke. She had seen something in his eyes, a knowledge of injustice, that resonated uncomfortably with her own. He was not merely using her. Or if he was using himself as well, binding two broken legacies together in a daring attempt at repair. But trust did not come easily anymore. In the dim light of her bedchamber, she turned the idea over and over. What would marriage to him mean? Would she find herself merely exchanging one kind of prison for another? Her father had called her useful when she was a child. Would Adrian, in time, come to think the same? Useful as a symbol, as a key to land and leverage, as a convenient way to settle his ghosts. And yet, he had caught her when she fell. She could not forget the feel of his arms, firm and sure, the way his voice had hardened in command when he called for help. There had been genuine fear there, genuine concern. Not for his plan. For her. No one had looked at her like that in a very long time. "Fool," she whispered to herself, turning onto her side. "You are too old to be flattered by a man's momentary alarm." But it was not flattery that tugged at her. It was possibility. She could not protect this estate alone much longer. The housekeeper did what she could. The staff remained loyal as far as their own survival allowed, but the tide was rising. Her cousin's letters grew more insistent, more condescending. They questioned her decisions under the guise of advice, suggested she sell parcels of land for her own comfort, and gently raised the spectre of specialists who might determine whether she was fit to continue in her role. If she faltered even once in public, they would descend. They wanted an excuse, just one. Marrying Adrian would deny them that excuse. It would give them a new obstacle to work around, a duke with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, whose own history with the Winchesters might make him doubly wary of their machinations. But it would also mean binding herself to a man whose past had been twisted by her father's greed. She would wake each morning beside someone who had every right to despise the name she bore. "Can you live with that?" she asked herself. "Can you live without his protection?" Dawn found her no closer to certainty. It brushed pale light across the ceiling as she sat up, eyes gritty, and prepared for another day of accounts, repairs, and small, stubborn acts of resistance against decline. By mid-morning she had nearly convinced herself to delay replying indefinitely, to let the question linger until necessity forced an answer for her. Then her cousin arrived. Cousin Edmund Winchester filled the doorway to her study with a presence that seemed to drag a chill in with him. He was not an especially large man, nor particularly imposing in stature, but there was something about the easy arrogance of his posture that made the room feel smaller. "Dear Ilara," he drawled, as if they were old friends meeting at a musicale rather than adversaries circling the same inheritance. "You are difficult to catch at leisure. Always so busy, I hear." Ilara set down her pen carefully. "Someone must be," she said. "The estate does not manage itself." Edmund smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "No, indeed. And you have done remarkably well, given the circumstances." The pause after remarkably was a small thing, but she heard it. "What brings you here, Edmund?" she asked. "Your letters have been frequent enough that I confess myself surprised you took the trouble to come in person. A man must occasionally see with his own eyes what he has written about so diligently," he replied, strolling into the room without invitation. He glanced at the shelves, the threadbare curtains, the ink stains on her fingers. "I wish to satisfy myself that you are managing." "I am," she said simply. "Are you?" His gaze sharpened. "Rumours reach even my distant corner of the world, you know. Whispers that Lady Alara Winchester is not quite herself these days, that the strain has become too much, that she has been unwell." Her hand, resting on the edge of the desk, curled into a fist. "I fainted once," she said, forcing the words out evenly. "After working too late into the night. I am not an invalid." "Once," Edmund repeated thoughtfully, "and in front of a visitor, I hear. A rather significant visitor, no less." Her pulse stumbled. "Who told you that?" "Oh, my dear, houses talk." He tapped a finger lightly against his cheek. "Servants speak to other servants, who speak to coachmen, who speak in the kitchens of other houses when they feel the urge to share a story. It is not difficult to trace the outline of events." She said nothing. "A duke, Ilara," Edmund went on, savouring the detail. "Adrian Ravenscourt himself. The irony is exquisite, is it not? The daughter of the man who ruined his family collapsing at his feet. I wonder what he made of it." She swallowed hard. "If you came simply to gloat over gossip, you may spare us both the time. I have work to do." "Oh, but this is very much my work," Edmund said smoothly. "As one of your closest relations, I have a vested interest in your well-being. If your health is failing—" "It is not. If," he continued, as if she had not spoken, "you find yourself unable to fulfill the demanding responsibilities of this estate, it would be remiss of me not to assist, to relieve you of certain burdens, to ensure that the Winchester properties do not fall into mismanagement." "You mean," Ilara said coldly, "to relieve me of them?" His smile widened. "For your own good, naturally." She stood then, the chair scraping softly against the floor. Her exhaustion fell away beneath a surge of anger that warmed her chilled limbs. "You speak as though I have not held this place together with my own hands for years," she said. "Where were you when creditors knocked at the door? When father's debts came due and this house tottered? You did not come with offers of assistance then. Only when the worst had passed did you find a sudden concern for my well-being." Edmund's eyes flashed, the polite veneer slipping for an instant. "You have done what you can," he said. "I will grant you that. But you are alone, Ilara. Alone, and by some accounts, fragile. If word spreads that you suffer fainting spells—" "It was one episode," she repeated. "Then those who already doubt your capacity will only grow more vocal. They will petition the courts for an inquiry. They will claim you are unfit to manage your own affairs. And then, my dear, matters will be taken out of your delicate hands entirely." "By you," she said. "Possibly," he allowed. "Or by others less familiar with our family's needs. Is that a risk you wish to take?" She hated him in that moment, hated his calm, his calculation, his willingness to twist a single moment of weakness into a noose around her neck. "Leave," she said, voice low. "Think carefully, Ilara," Edmund replied. "You may not have the luxury of many more choices." When he was gone, the quiet of the study felt heavier than before. The walls seemed to lean in, the air tight in her lungs. "He is right," she thought bitterly. "Not about my fitness, but about their eagerness. One misstep, one more fainting spell, one more public sign of strain, and her enemies would descend with legal petitions and sympathetic expressions. They would call it mercy while they took everything." Adrian's proposal no longer felt like a theoretical escape. It felt like a narrowing branch over a chasm. By evening, she had made her decision. The second letter she sent to Adrian was shorter than the first, and her hand did not shake. "Your Grace, if your offer of an alliance still stands, I accept. I do so with open eyes, aware of the history between our houses and the speculation such a union will invite. I cannot pretend the choice is made solely from inclination. Necessity has played its part. Yet within that necessity there is a measure of trust that you will not use my vulnerability as a weapon, and that together we may forge something different from the legacies we inherit. If we are to proceed, I would be grateful if we might meet to discuss the terms of our understanding. I ask only this, that whatever our marriage becomes, it will not strip me of the small agency I have fought so hard to retain. Respectfully, Ilara Winchester." When he received it, Adrian read the lines twice, then again absorbing not only the content, but the courage it represented. She did not embellish, did not hide that she was choosing him in part because the world had left her little alternative. Yet she also did not come to him as a supplicant. She came as someone extending her hand toward a shared endeavor. He closed his fingers around the letter, feeling its edges bite faintly into his skin. "She accepted, I take it," Marcus said from the doorway. He had a talent for appearing when least announced and most inconvenient. "She did," Adrian said. "And you look as if that both pleases and terrifies you." Adrian gave him a sardonic glance. "You are impertinent." "Frequently," Marcus said again, unrepentant. "Will you tell her everything?" Everything. That he had once imagined their marriage as a slow, exquisite form of retribution. That he had come into her house ready to exploit her desperation. That only the sight of her standing alone against a storm not of her making had forced his plan to bend. "Not yet," he said quietly. "Not like that, not now." Marcus studied him for a long beat, then nodded. "Then at least make certain that whatever your motives were, your actions from this point on are worthy of the woman you are about to bind yourself to." Their next meeting took place not at Winchester House, but at Adrian's London residence, a townhouse of restrained elegance, its lines clean and its interior ordered with a precision that reflected its master. Ilara arrived in a carriage that had seen better years, the velvet seats worn but carefully brushed, the exterior polished to a faint, stubborn sheen. As she stepped down with the aid of a footman, she felt the familiar prickle of eyes from the street. Passers-by slowed. Servants at neighbouring houses glanced up from their tasks. A Winchester calling upon Ravenscourt was an event. Adrian met her at the entrance himself. It was not strictly necessary. A butler could have received her. A maid could have removed her cloak. But he stood there nonetheless, dark coat impeccably cut, expression composed yet not quite impersonal. "Ilara," he said, the sound of her name on his lips, both strange and unexpectedly intimate. "Your Grace," she replied, inclining her head. His gaze flicked briefly over her face, as if searching for signs of lingering weakness. She held herself a fraction straighter, unwilling to give him or anyone the impression that she was fragile. "Thank you for coming," he said. "May I take your cloak?" She allowed him to. His fingers brushed the fabric near her shoulders, and she felt an unwelcome awareness skip along her skin. It had been some time since any man had stood so close without hostility or obligation clinging between them. He led her to a sitting room overlooking a small, well-tended garden. The room was warm without being stifling, its furnishings tasteful but not ostentatious. A low table already waited with tea and a plate of delicate biscuits she suspected had been ordered for her benefit. "I thought it best that we speak here," Adrian said, gesturing for her to sit. "My solicitor is available if we require him, but I wanted our first discussion to be between ourselves." "I am grateful for that," Ilara said, taking the offered seat. "I have spent enough of my life watching other people decide my fate in distant offices." He sat opposite her, not behind a desk, not looming over her, but as an equal at the same low table. It was a small thing, but it steadied her. "You accept my offer," he said. "I am honored." The word felt sincere. "And wary," she added gently. "As I am." A corner of his mouth lifted. "Yes, wary as well. But I believe we can set terms that respect both our concerns." "Then let us speak of them plainly," she said. "I have no talent for the kind of pretty half-truths my father preferred." "Nor I," he said. He poured the tea with a care that surprised her, as if he had done it often enough to be comfortable with the task. When he handed her the cup, their fingers brushed, and again that traitorous flicker of awareness threaded through her. "First," she said, wrapping her hands around the warm porcelain, "I would know what you expect of me as your wife, beyond the obvious social duties." He did not pretend not to understand. "You fear becoming a figurehead." "I fear becoming a pawn," she corrected. "Or worse, an ornament. Something to be displayed when convenient and ignored when not." His gaze held hers unflinching. "That is not what I want." "Then what do you want?" she asked softly. He considered his answer. "I want a partner in public appearance," he said. "Someone whose presence at my side sends a message that I do not shrink from the past, that I have chosen to confront it and reshape it. I want someone who will speak her mind, even when it disagrees with mine, so long as we do one another the courtesy of honesty in private. She had not expected that last admission. Heat rose faintly in her cheeks. "You would have me argue with you," she said. "Respectfully." "Respectfully," he agreed. "But yes. And your expectations regarding the Winchester estates?" He did not flinch. "I will not lie to you, Elara. I still intend to reclaim certain lands that were taken from my family under questionable circumstances. I believe you know better than most the nature of the acquisitions your father pursued." "I do," she said quietly. "However," he continued, "I mean to do so legally, transparently, and with your consent. If we are to correct old wrongs, we will do it in the open, not through forged contracts and courtroom ambushes. You will retain control of the properties rightly yours, those that were once Ravenscourt and became Winchester through fraud. I would see those restored, but not at the cost of your security." She exhaled slowly. This at least she had expected. In some ways it was a relief to hear it stated so clearly. "If I am to agree to such transfers," she said, "I want it understood that I do so willingly, not under pressure, not because you threaten to withhold your protection." "I will not coerce you," he said. "You might not need to," she replied. "There is a subtler kind of coercion in gratitude, independence. Promise me now, while I still have something resembling choice, that you will not use my feelings, whatever they may become, against me." The room seemed to tighten around that phrase, "whatever they may become." Adrian's expression shifted, something almost like pain flickering behind his eyes. "I swear to you," he said quietly, "I will not." She believed him. More dangerously, she wanted to. "And you?" he asked after a moment. "What do you expect of me?" She had thought of that, pacing her dim corridors at night. "I expect," she said slowly, "that you will not speak of my father's sins as if they are mine. That when society whispers about the scandal between our houses, you do not join the chorus, even in jest. That if anyone must cut at my name, it will not be the man who bears it with me." He nodded once. "You have that. And," she added, her voice softening despite herself, "I expect that if I stand beside you in public, you will not let others treat me as if I am some charity you have taken up. I will not be pitied." His jaw tightened. "I do not pity you." "Then show them that," she said. "When the time comes." "It will." Silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable. The outlines of their arrangement had begun to take shape, not merely as a cold bargain, but as the skeletal framework of something that might one day hold warmth. "There is another consideration," Adrian said at last, his tone shifting. "Children." Heat flared in her cheeks again, sharper this time. She had known the topic must arise. Marriages of their rank were rarely free from such expectations. Yet speaking of it with him here felt suddenly far more intimate than any discussion of land. "Yes," she managed. "Of course." "I do not demand heirs at any cost," he said, watching her carefully. "I am not my father, counting potential sons before they are even conceived. But I would be dishonest if I claimed no interest in securing the Ravenscourt line. At the same time, I recognize that you have endured enough demands on your body and mind. I would not have our marriage become another burden you dread." His frankness disarmed her. "I have often been spoken of as if my only value lay in what I could bear," she said quietly. "Heirs, alliances, expectations. I do not know yet what I want in that regard. I only know that I do not wish to be forced." "Then we will not force it," he said. "We will see what time brings." Her shoulders loosened fractionally, tension easing from muscles she had not realized were clenched. For the first time since they had begun this conversation, she allowed herself to imagine a future that was not only a series of battles. "Very well," she said. "Then, Your Grace, I accept our bargain, on the understanding that we both honor what we have just spoken." "It is Adrian," he said almost without thinking. She blinked. "Pardon?" "My given name," he clarified, a faint flush rising at his own impulsiveness. "If we are to be allies, you may use it, at least when we are alone." "Adrian," she repeated, tasting the shape of it. It suited him more than the distant title, strong, grounded, carrying an echo of the boy who had once watched his world stripped away and had chosen to rebuild it stone by stone. He exhaled, something easing in his chest at the sound of it. "Elara," he said in return. Her name in his voice felt like an acknowledgement. Not of her father, not of the scandal, of her. When she left his house that afternoon, the world beyond its doors felt changed, not because the streets had altered, or the sky had shifted color, but because she was no longer walking through them entirely alone. Word of their engagement spread faster than any messenger could have carried it. Within days, drawing rooms hummed with the news. A Ravenscourt and a Winchester joined by marriage? It was sensational. Some declared it a brilliant act of reconciliation. Others speculated darkly about ulterior motives. Cynics predicted disaster. Romantics whispered that it must be love, or at least the beginning of it. Ilara heard the echoes of those whispers in the letters that began arriving, some insincere congratulations, some veiled barbs. Edmund wrote again, a note dripping with false warmth. My dear cousin, what a surprising turn of events. I confess, I did not imagine you capable of securing so august a match. One can only hope that the strain of preparation does not prove too taxing for your constitution. Do remember that, should matters become overwhelming, I remain at your disposal. Cordially, Edmund Winchester. She burned that letter. Adrian, meanwhile, found himself the subject of curious glances in clubs and corridors. A few bold acquaintances approached him outright. Ravenscourt, my man, one of them said with a laugh over brandy. Marrying a Winchester? I thought you were the type to send dueling challenges, not wedding invitations. Times change, Adrian replied coolly. Another, more cautious, asked in private, Are you certain this is wise? Her father nearly ruined you. People will talk. People always talk, Adrian said. I prefer to give them something worth the breath. Through it all, Ilara and Adrian's interaction remained measured, careful, edged with formality, yet threaded with something deeper. They met to review details of the ceremony, to discuss the transition of certain properties, to finalize the settlements his solicitor drafted with her input. Each meeting revealed another facet. He saw how her eyes softened when she spoke of the servants who had remained loyal through hardship. She saw how his jaw tightened whenever old accounts were mentioned, as if the numbers themselves carried memory. He noticed the way her laughter, rare but genuine, brightened a room more than any candle. She noticed the small, unconscious kindnesses, a cloak placed around her shoulders when a chill crept into the air, a question asked about her fatigue that did not sound like criticism. Slowly his intention shifted from merely protecting her to wanting her happiness. It unsettled him, this expanding territory of concern, but he could not deny it. She in turn began to think of him not solely as the man her father had wronged by proxy, but as someone who understood, intimately, what it meant to have a family name dragged through the mud by others' choices. On the evening before the wedding, Ilara sat alone in her room at Winchester House, the very walls watching as if they too awaited judgment. Her gown, chosen with a compromise between modesty and dignity, hung near the wardrobe. The housekeeper had wept when she first saw it, pressing a wrinkled hand to her mouth. "You'll be safe now, my lady," the woman had whispered. "You'll have someone at your side." Safe, Ilara thought. The word felt fragile, like crystal in a careless hand. She looked around at the room that had been hers since childhood, the faded canopy, the small desk where she had once practiced letters her father scarcely glanced at, the window seat where she had hidden with books when voices rose below. Tomorrow she would leave this house as its mistress for the last time. She did not know if she would mourn or rejoice, perhaps both. There was a quiet knock at the door. The housekeeper entered carrying a small box. "This arrived for you, my lady," she said, eyes red but kind. "From His Grace." Ilara's heart gave a strange little leap. She took the box, fingers lingering for a moment on the smooth lid before opening it. Inside lay a necklace, not the ostentatious, heavy sort her father had favored for his wives and mistresses. This was a simple, elegant piece, a fine chain with a single clear stone at its center, cut to catch light without shouting its presence. It looked expensive, but not garish, thoughtful. There was a note tucked beneath, "For your new beginning." Adrian. She traced the letters with a fingertip, then closed her eyes briefly. It was a gift like the man himself had begun to appear to her, restrained on the surface, with deeper intention beneath. Tomorrow she would stand at his side and speak vows that would bind her life to his. She would do so not as a pawn, not as a desperate woman flinging herself at the first sign of shelter, but as someone who had chosen, however constrained the choice, to walk into a future where her fate was no longer decided entirely by the dead. Tomorrow Adrian Ravenscourt would look at her, not as Winchester's daughter, but as Ilara. She hoped, with a fervour that surprised her, that she would be able to look back at him in kind. The morning of the wedding dawned with a fresh hush, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Ilara woke not to dread, but to a kind of calm she could hardly recognize. Fragile, yes, but real. Today her fate would no longer be decided in silence. She would speak her own vows, for herself as much as for Adrian. The ceremony was not grand. Too many old friends had vanished, too many invitations quietly declined, too many families wary of what a Ravenscourt-Winchester alliance might mean for old alliances and recorded scandals. But those who did attend brought a peculiar gravity, as if sensing that something more than a simple union was being forged before their eyes. Among them, Ilara saw faces both kind and cold and felt more exposed than ever. But each time anxiety tried to claw at her chest, she found Adrian's steady gaze and remembered she need never fight alone again. His hand at hers was reassuring, cool and strong. When their vows were spoken, they were not the honeyed pledges of fairy tales, but things honest and solemn, promises not merely to shelter, but to stand side by side in the shadow of old pain. A murmur travelled through the pews at the quiet passion in Adrian's voice. For a moment, the world shrank to the warmth of his hand, the truth shining behind his eyes, and the hush of the chapel seemed a benediction. Afterward, at the modest reception, the whispers resumed like background music, old enemies, new acquaintances, and the ever-watchful cousins probing for weakness. It stung Ilara that her joy could taste so much like a test. But Adrian's presence changed everything. His arm at her back, his calm insistence that she greet the future alongside him, reminded her that every step they took was news to someone. Every glance, every word, became carefully weighed chess moves, except when, in an unguarded moment, she laughed at something he said and saw his own wariness break into rare, startled happiness. That first night in Adrian's home as his wife, Ilara stood at the window and listened to the city murmur. She confessed her fear that she would never be more than her family's ruin, a legacy no vows could erase. Adrian, behind her, promised quietly that what mattered most was not the sins of the dead, but what they built in defiance of those ghosts. For weeks after, the world pressed against them hard. Edmund and the other Winchester cousins filed official inquiries, contesting the legality of her holding, questioning her competence, even now that she was Duchess. Anonymous letters reached Adrian's lawyers, some threatening exposure, others offering bribes for a favourable word. There was a moment, late one evening, when Ilara's former housekeeper fled to their door in tears. The Winchester cousins had tried to buy her testimony in support of a claim that Ilara was mentally unsound. Instead, the loyal woman brought them the proof, her faith in Ilara unshaken. Through it all, Adrian became something more than a shield. He challenged every petition with his own legal acumen, stood beside Ilara at stormy dinners when the barbs grew sharp, and refused to allow even his own relatives to speak ill of her. She, in turn, gave him a sanctuary he had never known, a home not built on pride or old vendettas, but on the quiet, persistent hope that one day their names would mean something new. Yet beneath each shared victory, a shadow remained, the origin of their marriage. Ilara sensed it in the way Adrian sometimes grew silent when signing the final transfer of a disputed Ravenscourt field. She saw it in his eyes whenever a relative murmured, "At last, justice," over a regained estate. She knew that what had united them was not chance or affection, but first necessity, and perhaps in some distant corner of his heart, vengeance. It haunted her, the fear that love could not grow on ground sown with old grief. One evening, tension mounting, litigation threatening, exhaustion heavy as stone, she found Adrian in the study, staring out at the moonlit garden. She entered quietly. He did not turn. "It's nearly over," he said, not a question. "Within a week, the last of the claims will be dismissed. The papers are in order. The old lands are ours again." "Ours?" she echoed, her voice trembling on the edge of hope and suspicion. He turned then, the firelight carving sharp lines of fatigue and regret across his face. "Do you hate me yet?" he asked softly. She shook her head, stepping forward. "Why would I?" He looked at his hands. Because when I came to you, Ilara, my heart was still set on retribution. I wanted justice for my family, wanted the Winchester name humbled, its lands returned to my house. Marrying you was brilliant legal strategy. I told myself your suffering was the price justice demanded. His words were brittle as winter branches, but there was no malice, only shame. She pressed a hand to her heart to steady it. But something changed, he continued. You were nothing like the stories. You gave all you had to your people, even when it cost you the last of your pride. Each day I spent pretending this was only a bargain. I found myself defending you, not my cause. I hated your father still, but I could not, in all honesty, hate you. And the day I saw you nearly collapse from the weight of all this, I realized I could not bear to be another stone on your shoulders. Her eyes filled. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to know, he whispered. You deserve to choose if you can love a man who began as your jailer, who came to you not as a savior, but as a judge. She shook her head. You became my champion. You gave me the dignity of honesty, even when it frightened me. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ilara took both his hands in hers. Adrian Ravenscourt, you were forged by disappointment and anger, but you have built a gentler house on top of those ashes. I may not have chosen this path for myself, but I choose you. I choose the man who stayed when the world walked away. I choose the heart that let go of hate, even when it cost you your purpose. The dam inside him broke. He kissed her, not with the wild urgency of desperate youth, but with the reverence of a soul saved by its own capacity for change. She felt every unsaid apology, every broken oath mended, in the gentleness of his touch. The battles faded. The conspiracies fell quiet as evidence withered and relatives wearied of defeat. It was not a happy ending, but a hard-won peace, forged from choices, honesty, and an alliance born in darkness and grown, stubbornly, toward the light. Life at last began to resemble not a penance but a promise. In seasons that followed, the Ravenscourt house, once heavy with silence, filled with laughter and warmth. Ilara found her voice in society, commanding respect not through title, but through her undeniable courage. Adrian discovered in the rhythm of shared days that love might not erase his losses or sorrows, but could heal what vengeance could not. They became, to those who cared to look past gossip, a legend. The Duke and the heiress who defied history paid every debt and wrote a new chapter for both their names, one shaped not by anger, but by grace. And so concludes this journey of vengeance overcome by compassion, of two souls learning to trust and build a future together, stronger for the scars they carried and the forgiveness they chose. Epilogue: many seasons had passed since the night Adrian Ravenscourt chose love over the vengeance that had once defined him. The world had not forgotten the scandal that bound the names Ravenscourt and Winchester together, but it had softened. Gossip, like any flame, eventually burned down to embers when starved of new fuel. What remained in the end were not the old stories whispered in corners, but the quiet truth of how Adrian and Ilara lived. On a late afternoon brushed with pale light, Ilara stood on the terrace of Ravenscourt House and watched the fields stretch out in gentle folds beyond the gardens. The land that had once been at the center of so many battles lay calm now, its boundaries no longer contested, its tenants secure under a stewardship built on fairness rather than fear. Children's laughter drifted faintly from a distant lane. Somewhere in the orchards, a worker called to another, the sound easy and unhurried. Peace had weight, she had learned. It did not float lightly above a life, it settled into it, filling the cracks left by old wounds. Behind her the door opened with a familiar soft click. Adrian stepped out, the years having done little to dim the intensity of his presence. Silver threaded faintly through his dark hair now, and there were a few new lines at the corners of his eyes, lines earned not from anger, but from the surprising repeated act of smiling. "You're stealing my view again," he said quietly. She glanced over her shoulder, lips curving. "Your view? I believe, Your Grace, that we agreed this particular horizon belongs to us both." He moved to stand beside her, hands resting lightly on the stone balustrade. For a moment, they simply looked out together, the shared silence easy as breath. "There are days," he said at last, "when I still see it as it was, all those years ago. Court documents, painted accusations, that last gavel fall. Sometimes I'm surprised to look out and find only fields and sky." Ghosts will always try to revisit their old rooms, Ilara replied, but they have no claim here anymore. He turned his head, studying her face as if committing it anew to memory. Time had changed her as well. The tired pallor that had once clung to her was gone, replaced by a healthier color warmed by sunlight and movement. She still carried a certain gravity. Some people never lost the habit of bracing for impact, but there was a softness now too, an ease in the set of her mouth and the way her eyes lit when she looked at him. "You did that," he said softly. "You turned a haunted place into a home." "I only followed your example," she countered. "You were the one who chose not to let bitterness decide everything." He huffed a quiet breath. "I had help, a woman who insisted that protecting her did not require destroying what little she had left." "Stubborn woman," she murmured. "Impossible woman," he corrected, affection threaded through every syllable. From inside the house came a sudden bright peal of laughter, high and ringing, the sound of a child unencumbered by history. A heartbeat later, small footsteps pattered across polished floors, growing louder. "Ilara! Adrian!" a young voice called, each syllable bubbling with urgency and delight. Their son burst onto the terrace in a whirl of energy and half-fastened buttons. His hair, dark like his father's, refused to lie flat. His eyes, a deep clear shade that recalled Ilara's, sparkled with mischief. "Papa, you promised you'd come see the foal," he exclaimed, tugging at Adrian's sleeve. "Thomas says it might be the fastest in all the county, but he's only guessing because he hasn't seen it run yet, and I told him you would know. You always know." Adrian's stern ducal composure lasted perhaps all of 2 seconds. Then it crumbled into a smile so open that Ilara's heart ached with quiet joy. "Did I now?" he said, crouching to bring himself level with the boy's earnest eyes. "Well, I cannot very well let Thomas go about making such claims without proof, can I?" The child shook his head vehemently. "No, you must come at once." "At once is a very serious time," Adrian replied gravely. "What do you think, my lady? Shall we abandon the strategic business of admiring the horizon in order to investigate this foal?" "I suppose," Ilara said, adopting an air of thoughtful consideration, "that some matters of state can wait in the face of such an urgent equine inquiry." Their son grinned, victory secured. He seized one of Adrian's hands and without hesitation reached for Ilara's as well. She let herself be drawn between them, their fingers interlaced. For a moment as they began to walk, she had the odd sensation of being perfectly balanced, anchored on one side by the man she had chosen, and on the other by the future they had created. They made their way through the house together, past portraits that no longer stared down in judgment but simply existed. Some of the old Winchester faces still hung in quiet corners at Ilara's insistence. She had refused to erase them completely, claiming that forgetting was too easy a mercy. Instead, they remained where they were, contextualized now by new paintings commissioned in later years, tenants' children in Sunday best, landscapes of fields at harvest, a few canvases of family moments she cherished more than she cared to admit. In one small receiving room, a particular portrait caught Adrian's eye as they passed. It was not especially large nor framed in gaudy gold, but he always slowed near it. The artist had captured Ilara years before, standing in the entry hall of Winchester House, her gaze turned slightly away as if listening for a sound only she could hear. The painter had not flattered her. There were still shadows under her eyes, still a delicate tension in the set of her shoulders, but there was also a glimmer of defiance there, a fragile, luminous hope that had drawn him long before he could name it. If someone had told that woman that one day she would walk between a husband and child, laughing about horses, he wondered if she would have believed it. Perhaps. She had always been braver than she knew. They emerged into the stable yard, the late sun gilding every rough stone and weathered board. Thomas, the head groom, straightened and tipped his cap. "Brought reinforcements, did you, lad?" he called to the boy. "I brought the Duke," their son announced importantly. "And Mamma. That's better than reinforcements." Thomas's eyes crinkled. "So it is, Master Henry, so it is." The foal in question, a lanky creature with more enthusiasm than grace, stood near its dam, ears pricked forward. At the sight of people, it made an eager, clumsy attempt at a trot, legs a tangle of intention and not quite coordination. Henry laughed aloud, the sound echoing off the stable walls. "He's perfect," Ilara said softly. Adrian glanced at her, hearing in those two words not just affection for a young horse, but something deeper, a quiet astonishment that life could grow so freely in soil once soaked with contention. "Do you remember," he murmured, "when we stood in courtrooms and fought over lines on a map?" "I remember you standing," she said. "I was not there, but I have seen it many times in my mind. I used to think," he went on, watching Henry move toward the foal with a cautious hand, "that if I could redraw those lines, if I could make the papers say what they should have said, it would fix me, make everything right again." "And did it?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, you did." She looked down, her fingers tightening briefly around his. "We fixed each other," she said. "That is the only way such things ever truly mend." They watched their son for a while, speaking little. The boy's laughter, the foal's clumsy hops, the stable's earthy scents, all of it wove into a tapestry of small, ordinary joys. It struck Adrian, not for the first time, that these were the victories vengeance could never have given him. "Papa," Henry called back over his shoulder, "when I'm big, can I ride across all of this, all the way to the far trees?" "If your mother permits," Adrian said at once. Ilara lifted a brow. "If your father teaches you properly, then I shall do both," Henry declared confidently, already certain of the world's cooperative nature. Adrian's arm found its place around Ilara's waist with the ease of long practice. She leaned into him, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly, so only he could hear. "Letting go of what you once wanted?" He knew what she meant. Not the land, they had together sorted what was just and what was not, but the raw, uncompromising thirst for retribution that had once seemed as necessary to his survival as air. "No," he said simply. "There are moments when the past tugs at me, like an old injury in bad weather. But I look at him," he nodded toward their son, "and at you, and I realize that what I have now could never have grown from soil salted by spite." She smiled, eyelids lowering against sudden emotion. "I used to think I would spend my life apologizing for being a Winchester," she confessed. "Now I wake up and remember that I am more than that. I am your wife, his mother, myself." "That," Adrian said reverently, "is all I ever wanted for you." Later that evening, when the house had quieted and Henry slept like a small star in his bed, Adrian and Ilara stood together once more by the window of their room. The moon hung low, casting silver over the gardens. From here the world looked both distant and very near. "Do you know what I fear now?" Ilara asked softly. He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Tell me." "That he will grow up hearing only the legend," she said. "The neat, polished version people tell at dinners. The Duke and the disgraced heiress who married and fixed everything. I don't want him to think it was that tidy, or that easy." "What do you want him to know?" Adrian asked. "That we were both wrong in different ways," she replied. "That we hurt and doubted and made terrible choices for reasons that seemed right at the time. That forgiveness is not a single grand moment, but a series of small, stubborn decisions. That love is not something we fell into. It is something we built day after day, even when the foundations trembled." Adrian was quiet for a heartbeat. "Then we will tell him that," he said. "Not all at once, not before he is ready, but we will show him. In the way we speak to each other, in the way we argue and make peace again, in the way we protect him without teaching him to hate." Ilara's hand slipped into his. Their fingers wove together, familiar and new all at once. "Once," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I was certain my life would be nothing but the echo of my father's sins. Then you walked into my house, with vengeance in your eyes, and somehow we both walked out with something else entirely." "A future," he said. "A soul," she added, looking up at him. "Yours, mine, ours." He kissed her then, the world outside fading to a blur of moonlight and shadow. There was no urgency in it, no desperation, only a deep, steady warmth, the kind that came from knowing that whatever storms might rise again, they had already proven they could weather them side by side. Far below, unseen from their window, the old boundaries of the estate lay still under the night sky. Once those lines on a map had been weapons. Now they marked not conquest but care, land tended by hands that remembered hunger and hardship and had chosen, finally, to leave a kinder legacy. In years to come, bards and busybodies alike would tell the story of Adrian Ravenscourt and Elara Winchester, how vengeance led him to her door, and how somewhere along the way he fell deeply, irrevocably in love with her soul. Some would embroider the tale, softening edges or heightening drama. But at the heart of it all, the truth would remain simple. He did not win because he took back what was his. He won because he chose, at last, to give. And she, who had spent so long paying for another man's crimes, finally found a home where her name meant not shame but grace. Together they proved that even the darkest stories could find a different ending when two wounded hearts decided to write one more page. Dear listeners, if this story moved you, please subscribe to Echoes of Romance. Leave us your thoughts and comments. Like and share to help this tale reach more hearts, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new chapter of love and redemption. Your company gives meaning to every word. Thank you for joining us on this journey.